What's wrong with you people? I'm serious.
Not asking, how do I feel about this, or how can I intellectually rationalize this, or what do the studies show? Ultimately, we're asking the question of what does the Bible say?
It's a specific attack against the true God. Because when's the last time you heard someone stub their toe and go, "Oh, Buddha"? It doesn't happen.
Jesus wants the rose. That's the point of the gospel.
All right, and we are live. What is up, Reasons for Jesus? What's up, everybody checking us out on YouTube? I am Dave Wilson here, as always, with Skippy John Jansen for another episode of Worldview Warriors, and we've got a good one tonight.
Really good one.
Yeah, I am super excited about tonight. I know the last couple that we've done has been dealing with the occult and demonology and New Age and things like that, and we're kind of shifting gears a little bit today. Today we are going to be looking at culture, looking at sexuality, and looking at worldview and sort of how it plays into that. So really you can kind of pick a hot button topic, whether it's LGBT issues, abortion, hookup culture, pornography, whatever, and it's all going to be somewhat related to what we're going to be going over today. So super relevant. And the thing that I'm most excited about, we have a very special guest today, but we're not going to be looking at just sort of these the surface level arguments, right? It's not going to be about showing you arguments to own your liberal relatives at the Labor Day barbecue. This year we're going to be looking at really sort of the foundational issues, the presuppositions, the underlying assumptions that are sort of on the level below our beliefs. We do just want to give a quick semi-parental advisory here. We are going to be talking about some adult topics, so if you are, I know we have a lot of like moms with little ones and stuff that listen to us, so just be forewarned that again, I don't imagine it'll be overly graphic, but we will be talking about some adult issues here today.
Definitely. So I'm just going to give a quick intro for our guest today. If you haven't heard of her, please pick up some of her books. She is a best-selling author, Nancy Pearcey. She's the author of Love Thy Body, Answering Hard Questions About Life and Sexuality, as well as The Soul of Science, Saving Leonardo, Finding Truth, and Total Truth. She has been highlighted as one of the top 5 women apologists in Christianity today, and hailed in The Economist as America's preeminent evangelical Protestant female intellectual. Also, she is currently the professor of apologetics and scholar in residence at Houston Baptist University, and she's also the editor-at-large of the Pearcey Report and fellow at Discovery Institute Center for Science and Culture.
And she's also featured in Courageous World Changers, which is a great book. I have a lot of young daughters, so we like to read to them about women heroes of the faith and things like that. I didn't even realize that she was featured in this one, but I found that out like 2 days ago. So let's go ahead and bring her in. Professor Pearcey, welcome to the show. It is awesome to have you.
Thank you, and thanks for that introduction. The book, the children's book, I'm so glad you found that right before the show. That's my biggest honor by far.
Right. My daughters were very excited when I told them that I was interviewing someone that we had read about. I think we read about you yesterday. So great book though. Cool. So, culture seems to have kind of lost its collective mind on moral issues, and it seems like the radical left has really kind of become mainstream overnight. Thinking back to like when I was in high school, 10, 15 years ago, it was like the voices that said, homosexuals and things like that saying, hey, we're just people too, please tolerate us, have now turned into saying, almost like celebrate us or we're just going to cancel you. And, just a few elections ago, the voices on the left were saying, let's keep abortion safe, legal, and rare. That was kind of the slogan. And, over just a few years, it's like that's turned into abortion on demand for any reason at any time. And there have even been some extreme enough to call for a post-birth abortion. I don't know how you keep that language, but that along with like moral acceptance of things like the hookup culture and pornography seem to be at an all-time high, and cited in your book as a study that shows that attitudes towards pornography for the younger generations, they basically view it as no worse morally than like not recycling. And, thanks to technology, it's like we can now order a hookup partner, with a swipe of a thumb, almost easier than we can order a pizza. You've got like transgenderism or, gender dysphoria, which has gone from being something that was considered a mental disorder up until just a few years ago. And it's now something that, people are kind of being pushed on, kids younger and younger. And, you have voices calling for, parents calling for hormone therapy for their kids and sex reassignment surgery and stuff of just young children. And it's like, even if you just oppose these things or even question them, you get labeled a bigot or transphobic or whatever. And I think that many Christians look at these things and, kind of their jaws drop to the floor in awe of how quickly some of this stuff has happened. And in your book, Professor, you kind of tie these issues together. You look at things like the sexual revolution and euthanasia and some other things, and you really peel back the layers of the proverbial onion and deal with the core of the issue, the underlying assumptions, the things that these are built on. If you could kind of break it down for us, what do these issues have in common? What is the worldview that this kind of belief stems from?
Yeah, I'm glad you went straight to the worldview, because that's where we really need to engage with these issues. And it is surprising for many people to find out that there is a common worldview underlying all of these issues. And if you master that, then you're ahead of the game. You instead of reacting to each individual issue and mastering arguments for each individual issue, you can understand the underlying worldviews that's driving them all. And the underlying worldview is actually a very negative view of the body. That's why the book is titled Love Thy Body, because the main argument I make is that secular ethic is based on a denigration of the body, the low value of the body, and that Christianity, to everyone's great surprise, actually rests on a very high view of the body, the value, the dignity, the significance of the human body. And to make that clear, I thought maybe we could jump in with an example. The cutting edge issue, of course, right now is transgenderism. So maybe we could start there. And that's also where it's easiest to see, because after all, the transgender activists actually argue that your gender identity has nothing to do with your biological sex, that your body does not tell you anything about who you are. Children as young as first grade are coming home from school saying, "Mommy, am I a girl or a boy? My teacher's telling me if I have girl parts, that doesn't mean I'm a girl. If I have boy parts, that doesn't mean I'm a boy." There's actually a mother who's taking a school to court because her daughter came home so distressed because she no longer knew if she was a girl or not. And she literally said to her mom, "Mom, take me to the doctor so we can find out."
Oh, man.
What I am. But the point is that children down to kindergarten now are being taught your body is irrelevant, insignificant, and has nothing to, it's not part of your authentic self. There's a BBC documentary on the subject that says the heart of the debate is the idea that your mind can be at war with your body. That there's this huge disjunction between the mind and the body. And of course, in that war, it's the mind that wins. It's your internal sense of self that determines who you are, not your body, not your anatomy, not your physiology, not your chromosomes, not your biological sex. In fact, there are transgender websites that say the term biological sex is a hate term.
Wow.
And let me say, to make this really relevant, I printed out an article from the Wall Street Journal. The most recent Supreme Court case on this issue, which was Bostock, decided June 15 this year, essentially endorsed that worldview that your body is not who you are. I warned about this in my book, Love Thy Body, but now it's actually happened. That now, in order to treat a trans woman, that is somebody born male, the same as a biological woman, the law has to say your body doesn't matter. Your body is legally irrelevant. And that's exactly what the court said in Bostock. It said, being a woman, it involved a trans woman. Okay, so someone who was born male and claimed a female identity. So the court decided that that female is a state of mind, and therefore it has nothing to do with your biology. If you feel like you're a woman, you are treated in the law as a woman. So your body is essentially irrelevant or even invisible in terms of the law these days. So that's just to show how much these ideas are now integrated into a society. We've got a Supreme Court decision now that's not really about law so much as it is about philosophy. It's enforcing a worldview. It's enforcing a worldview that says the body is split from the mind, and the body doesn't count. All that counts is your mind. So that's a worldview, and it's now being enforced by law.
Right, and it seems like, with that recent court decision that, it's like from a legal standpoint, we've lost the ability to even determine what constitutes a woman. And that seems really ironic because, you look at the push of, feminism and things like that, or, you talk gender wage gap and things like that. And it's like, okay, well, does that not just completely undercut all these things that people have been fighting for if now you can't even define what a woman is legally?
Oh, absolutely. That's why some feminists are very, very concerned about the trans movement. They recognize that, if you can't identify a category of people, you cannot legally defend them.
Right.
So there is kind of a battle going on now between transgender activists and certain feminists. Now, some feminists buy into it, and the ones who don't buy into it are actually being labeled with a derogatory term. Have you heard the term TERF?
Yes.
TERF. Okay. Trans exclusionary radical feminist, TERF, and that is being used as a slur against feminists who are very concerned that we're losing the definition of women and therefore we're losing women's rights.
Wow.
And males are entering into women's spaces and women's sports and so on. And I happen to be in a group of it's a very fascinating group. So there's very conservative Christian women, and then there's lesbian, socialist, leftist. We've actually come together as a group called Hands Across the Aisle, and we're supporting each other and helping each other on this issue. And it's fascinating to be working hand in hand with people who are so different. But that just goes to show that people across the political spectrum are recognizing what you just said. You cannot protect women's rights if you cannot define what a woman is.
Yeah, that's interesting. And, it's kind of interesting, too. You mentioned about having a high view versus a low view of the body. And it's, again, a lot of the feminist, and not even like extreme feminist groups, but just you hear a lot of women talking about, body positivity and things like that, loving the skin you're in and things like that. But then it's like, okay, then what is the message to someone who is maybe unsure of who they are on the inside? We're telling them, okay, well, no, the skin you're in is not good enough. You need hormone therapy and surgeries and things like that. It's just such a mixed message, it seems like.
And it's so unnecessary because something like 80 to 90%, depending on the study, of kids who have gender dysphoria outgrow it. When they go through puberty and there's the rush of hormones, the vast majority outgrow it. They become comfortable in their body, and they become comfortable in their biological sex. So the incredible interventions of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, surgery, and so on, is not necessary. I sometimes get pushed back by people who say, well, if there's a conflict between the body and the mind, why choose the body? What's wrong with choosing the mind? And the answer is your feelings can change. And they often do. 80 to 90% of kids with gender dysphoria do end up resolving in favor of their biological sex. And so your body is a scientific empirical fact.
Right.
It's something that's objectively knowable, and it doesn't change. So it is a more reliable indicator of your identity than your feelings are.
Yes.
Well, I always think, we're in a constant process of development, especially males, our frontal lobe isn't even fully developed until we're 25. And so to, put the gender in the hands of little children while they're still developing just seems, it brings it down to absurdity, in my opinion.
Yeah, there was a study done at Brown University by a researcher named Lisa Littman. And what she found was that 63% of most of them are girls now, teenagers who are claiming cross-sex identity. Most of them today are girls. So the study found that 63% of these girls had previously diagnosed at least one mental health disorder prior to the onset of their gender dysphoria. In other words, all teenagers have some anxiety and depression.
Sure.
But these were kids that was so severe that they had actually been taken to a therapist and been diagnosed.
Right.
And so it happened to be things like ADHD, anxiety, depression, autism. Autism is the most reliable correlate. Nobody knows quite why, but autism has been for a long time correlated with transgenderism. At any rate, the point is these kids are very troubled kids, and what they really need is for somebody to sit down with them and talk to them and find out what's going on with them. I had a chance to write an article where I interviewed several parents of transgender teenagers. And in every case, I got stories of they'd already been diagnosed with autism, ADHD, self-harming was common. So I got to hear, firsthand from these parents, and it was very troubling to know that nobody's helping these kids. They're just giving them puberty blockers, hormones, and so on. So I think that's a big mistake. In my book, I do tell the story of a young boy who had gender dysphoria, who clearly had gender dysphoria from a very young age. True gender dysphoria tends to start very young. Today we're seeing a lot of teenagers, discovering for the first time as a teen. That's not the classic case. In fact, there's even a new name for it. They're calling it rapid onset gender dysphoria.
Okay.
Because this is a new phenomenon. In Love Thy Body, I told the story of a boy who, it's more the classic case where I called him Brandon, who clearly had gender dysphoria from a very young age. Before he was even walking, his babysitter said to his mother, "He's too good to be a boy." By which she meant, he's quiet and compliant and gentle, and the things we stereotypically associate with girls. In preschool, when his mother picked him up, invariably he was playing with the little girls and not the boys. By elementary school, he was coming to his parents repeatedly, weeping and saying, I think the way girls do. I'm interested in the things girls are. God should have made me a girl. And by age 14, he was scouring the internet for information on sex reassignment surgery. So what did his parents do? First of all, they made it very clear to him that they loved him just the way he was. I had a friend when I was in seminary who was a former homosexual, and he said, when I was young, I was into music and art, and my father was baffled and tried to toughen me up by pushing me into more masculine activities like sports. And so Brandon's parents didn't do that. They told him it's perfectly acceptable to be a gentle, sensitive, relational boy.
Yeah.
It does not mean you're really a girl. And they even went through things like the gifts of the spirit.
Gentleness and self-control, and
and the other gifts. The list where it's prophecy and teaching are not masculine, as
right.
You and I might, we might think. Mercy and service are not feminine. The scripture says the Holy Spirit gives them to each individual as he chooses. So they helped him to come to grips with the notion that it's okay to be a non-gender conforming man.
Yeah.
And he's in his early 20s now, and he is pretty much accepted that he's not going to transition. He's accepted that he's male. He's just realizes he's never going to fit into most male groups, but that's okay. That God has. Here's what his parents used to say to him: maybe God has gifted you for one of the caring professions, like psychologist, counselor, healthcare worker.
Sure.
And they used to say, when he was very troubled by the very macho stereotypes because he didn't fit them. And his parents would say, it's not you that's wrong, it's the stereotypes that are wrong.
That's right.
So I think that's where church, and he says even now, the hardest place is the church. That churches are very tied to the masculine and feminine stereotypes, more so than the general culture.
Wow.
And so I think that's the message to the church, is if we want to intervene and with young kids who are confused about their gender, we really need to rethink the gender stereotypes and maybe even go out of our way to seek out the girls and the boys who don't quite fit the stereotypes and give them extra support. Because the secular culture is waiting to pounce on them.
Yes. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Okay, awesome. So yeah, I thought that the transgender analogy I thought was very helpful in talking about sort of what you did. The other one that I thought was abortion. Could you maybe just say just briefly how that same sort of idea of splitting the body and the person applies to something like abortion?
Yes, but can I give you just one example on transgender before we leave that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because what I think is cool is the secular world is actually starting to see this. You're starting to see critics of the transgender movement saying it expresses body hatred.
Yes.
You're seeing secular people say this, and this is there was an interview that came out with a 14-year-old girl on a very secular liberal website. She had lived as a trans boy from age 11 for 3 years, and then had reclaimed her identity as a girl. And she said the turning point came when I realized it's not conversion therapy to learn to love your body. Which would have been a great quote for a book titled Love Thy Body.
Sure.
But it's very encouraging to see that some secular people are starting to see the issue with transgenderism is your view of the body, that it has a negative view of the body. It's a little harder to see with abortion because it's just not the typical argument that most people make. What you have to understand is secular professional bioethicists today agree that life begins at conception. We tend to think that's the argument. It's not anymore. Not with professional bioethicists. The evidence of science and DNA and all is just too strong to deny it. So then the question is, how do they get around that in order to support abortion? What they say is, well, the fetus is human at some point, but not a person until sometime later. So at some point, it's biologically human, genetically human, chromosomally human, but it's just a body, as they will sometimes say. It's just a body. At some later point, it becomes a person, usually defined in terms of mental abilities, some level of cognitive functioning, self-awareness, and so on. Only then does it acquire moral significance. Only then does it acquire legal status. Then does it warrant any kind of legal protection. But you see, it's that same divide. It's the body versus the person, and the person defined mentally. It's really the same divide. As long as it's merely human, merely in quote marks, as long as the fetus is merely human, it can be killed for any reason or no reason. It can be used for research and experiments. It can be tinkered with genetically. It can be picked through for sellable body parts, like Planned Parenthood does, and then tossed out with the other medical waste. And that's how medical journals actually describe it, medical waste. So notice that being human is not a basis for human rights.
Right.
They've acknowledged that the fetus is human. But it's that same two-part divide of the human being where the denigration of the body, the denigration of being human, and all of your significance value comes from the mind. So it's still the same mind-body dualism that we saw with transgenderism.
Right, and I think that really kind of almost sort of I'm looking for reforms the way that we can talk about something like abortion with that, because you can spend all day proving, okay, yes, this is living, yes, it is human, but it's like, okay, someone can accept that and say, well, yeah, it is living and human, but it's not really a person. And it just really kind of changes where we want to put our energy or something like that if we are speaking with someone who comes from the other persuasion there. But I thought those two, both transgenderism and abortion, were sort of the two that, when I got to those chapters, I was like, oh, okay, I totally see what she's talking about with the body-person divide and things like that. That was very good.
Well, the other one that is sort of a cutting-edge issue is homosexuality. That one is, I have people find that one a little harder to understand too. So think of it this way. Even my homosexual friends will agree that when it comes to that, biologically, anatomically, physiologically, chromosomally, males and females are counterparts to one another. Mm-hmm. That's how the human sexual and reproductive system is designed. To embrace a same-sex identity then is to contradict that design. It's to say, why should I care about what my body tells me? Why should I let my biological sex determine my moral choices? Mm. So we have to help people realize that's a very disrespectful view of the body. Mm-hmm. You're essentially saying my body doesn't matter. All that matters is my internal sense of sexual orientation, my feelings and desires. So again, it's not quite as clear cut as transgenderism, but it is the same thing. You're essentially saying, I know my body's oriented towards male-female relationships, but why should I be determined in any way by my body? Here's let me give you a quote from an outspoken lesbian on this. You may know her, Camille Paglia.
Okay, I've heard the name.
Yeah, a lot of Christians kind of like to read her just because she's a bit of an iconoclast. Unlike other feminists, she disagrees with them that sex is just a social construction.
Okay.
She says, no. Nature made us male and female. Humans are a sexually reproducing species. But then she says, then you say, well, how do you justify being a lesbian then? She says, nature made us male and female, but why not defy nature? These are her exact words. Why not defy nature? And listen to how she puts it. Fate, not God, has given us this flesh. We have absolute claim to our bodies and may do with them as we see fit. Mm-hmm. So she's saying, okay, even though nature made me female, why should I let that govern my choices? Why should I, if my body is a product of mindless, purposeless forces, then it has no inherent purpose.
That's right.
That I'm morally obligated to respect. I can impose whatever I want on it, and who's to say that that's a problem? So that kind of gets at the underlying mentality of why should I care about my body? It's really the same mind-body dualism again, and the same denigration, the same demeaning of the body.
That's good, and I think that really does kind of start to dig deep when you look at it. There is a vast distinction in how we look at the world when we come to it from, as you described, like a teleological approach or an approach from design. We can, and even people who aren't Christians, maybe even philosophers, can still even look at the design and say, okay, yes, this is designed for something, but it's like we've just through Darwin and things like that have really lost the idea of any design. It's just sort of by chance, and well, if there's not design, there's only chance. That's going to have consequences.
Exactly, and in my book, Love Thy Body, I do trace it to Darwin. You're absolutely right. It was Darwin who really convinced the Western world that nature is a product of blind, purposeless, mindless forces. Mm-hmm. And when we talk to people about issues like homosexuality, transgenderism, and so on, this gives us the opportunity to frame the argument in a very positive way. That Christianity actually has a much higher view of the body. We're calling people to respect your biological identity, to honor your biology. I find that when I speak to Christian audiences, it takes them a while to get their minds around this because they're so used to the negative terminology, right?
Sure.
it's wrong, it's a sin, don't do it. And there's
Right.
something wrong with you.
Mm-hmm.
And what I help people to see is that, now look, the secular view has a negative view of the body, and that gives us a wonderful opportunity to frame the Christian position, the Christian ethic, in terms of it values the body. It treats the body as having a purpose that we are obligated to respect. Our body is part of our authentic self.
Mm-hmm.
Let me give you an example. One of the key story. I have lots of personal stories. I want to help people to realize the book's not just a bunch of moral arguments. There's lots and lots of personal stories.
Mm-hmm.
And reviewers always notice that when they write reviews of the book. It's full of personal stories, especially her students.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was a great blend of things. You got enough that's done from studies and even secular studies too. It's not like you're just quoting like Focus on the Family all the time or something. You're quoting Guttmacher and all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
So so this was one of my favorite stories. There was a young man named Sean, and he said, I was exclusively attracted to same sex from the time I was quite young, and I think he was even raised in the church. Yes, he was. But today he's married and has 3 children. And the interesting thing about Sean's story, by the way, he's also a Christian ethics professor in London. Anyway, the interesting thing about his story is he was raised in a gay affirming family and a gay affirming church. So he wasn't driven by shame or guilt. That's the assumption, right? Is that people who are former homosexuals are just self-loathing, self-hating people. He was not driven by shame or guilt. So what made the difference? The way he puts it is, I came to see my identity not in terms of my sexual feelings, but in terms of my body. I came to realize that God has created my body, and like I said earlier, it's an external empirical fact about me.
Sure.
that I should respect. And he said, I came to see that instead of trying to change I wasn't trying to change my feelings, because that doesn't usually work. But what I did do is I came to accept my body, my male body, as a good gift from God. And eventually my feelings started to follow suit. So I love this story, because the nutshell that we need to get across to people is this debate hangs on the question of, is the cosmos a product of blind material forces and therefore has no particular purpose? Or is it a product of a loving creator who does have a purpose and meaning for us? And that we are called to honor our body and live in accord with the creator's design. And that kind of language is what I'd like to help people adopt. We are talking about honoring your body, living in accord with the creator's design, respecting our biological sex. The positive language is what's going to win people over.
Yes, and I love that about your book. So if we could here, let's switch gears a little bit and let's look at, people will many times associate Christian sexual ethics and morals and things like that as being something that's old-fashioned, something that's traditional, things like that. But when you look at things on a grand scale of history, there's really nothing traditional about Christianity's values. If you could break that down a little bit in terms of what was the culture like that Christianity emerged from, and then how did the Christian ethics really reform and really overturn those the worldview assumptions in the world that came from?
Yeah, in both Greek and Roman culture, women had few rights. Marriage was held in disdain. It was completely acceptable for men to have sex with virtually anyone they wanted to, except for another married woman. She belonged to somebody else. But anyone else, prostitutes, mistresses, concubines, and most of all, slaves. Most men of any means had slaves, and slaves were considered totally fair game. Adult and children, male and female. and women would sometimes complain. We find this in the literature. Women, weren't happy that their husbands were having sex with the slave boys. And I actually have a quote in Love Thy Body from a contemporary Roman, essentially admonishing women not to complain because they should realize that sex with boys was more pleasurable anyway. So that was a very common, yes, it was hard reading. This was difficult research.
Yes.
But, and I have to tell you, just jumping ahead slightly, this was not easy to eradicate. Augustine in the 4th century was still telling Christian men why it was not okay to have sex with their slaves. And I think it was St. John Chrysostom as well, was still writing and preaching on, men are supposed to put all of their erotic and affectional energy into their wives. Of course, and when they did, of course, it greatly elevated the status of women and the status of marriage. But I'd also like to add that on the side of just the meaning of the body, one reason the Greeks and Romans did this is because they also had a low view of the body, just like modern secularism does, though for different reasons. They didn't have Darwin, but what they did have was Gnosticism, Platonism, Manichaeism. Augustine was a Manichae. And all of these isms in the ancient world treated the material realm as a realm of death, decay, and destruction, and evil. And Plato called the body the prison house of the soul. And so the goal of salvation was to escape the physical realm and to ascend to the higher realms. In this context, Christianity was nothing short of revolutionary. Gnosticism taught that it was even a low-level God who created this world, because no self-respecting God would get his hands dirty mucking about with matter, since matter is evil. And so Christianity came along saying, no, it was the highest God, it was the supreme God, who is a good God, who created this universe. And therefore, the material world is intrinsically good. It's inherently and originally good. But the biggest scandal at the time was the incarnation, the idea that that same supreme God had actually entered into the material world and taken on a physical body. And so the incarnation is probably the ultimate affirmation of the dignity of the human body. And then when Jesus was executed on a Roman cross, excuse me, we might say he did escape the prison house of the body, as Gnosticism taught we should aspire to do. But what did he do? What did he do then? He came back in a physical body. To the ancient Greeks, this was not spiritual progress. This was regress. As Paul says in 1 Corinthians, the idea of a physical resurrection was utter foolishness to the Greeks. And then at the end of time, God's not going to scrap the material universe as if he made a mistake the first time around. Instead, he's going to renew it and restore it and create a new heavens and a new earth. And we will be on there, that new earth, in physical bodies. From the Apostles' Creed, Christians have affirmed the resurrection of the body.
That's right.
As you guys know, there's nothing like that in any other religion or philosophy. Christians have to come to realize that we have a message here on the value and dignity and significance of human life that no other religion or philosophy has. We should just be outpouring, with enthusiasm and excitement at the beauty of Christianity. We just can't wait to tell other people about it. This is what I'd like to help people to recover in my book, Love Thy Body. Realize what it's an amazing gift we have to give people.
That's beautiful. And and I think even a lot of Christians too, sort of falsely think of, sort of our eschatology as being, okay, well, if you're a Christian, one day you get to die and go to heaven. And it's like, well, that's not, I mean, that's true, but it's like, heaven isn't ultimately our goal in the sense of being, a disembodied spirit. Again, like you said, it's a physical recreation. It's the new heavens and the new earth. It's physical. We have bodies of the same type, whatever that means, as the glorified body that Christ had when he came back, a physical body that people could touch and he ate. And yeah, that's, that is so unique. Man, when you mention sort of what that's like, where you have, sort of the male, almost ruling class that's able to get away with whatever he wants to, sexually speaking, and, doing things with slaves or, unmarried women or whoever else. It's like, man, like that almost reminds me of like, what's going on with like Epstein and Maxwell and, some of that stuff there. And even the, Weinstein. And like
guy.
yeah, and then you have the response of a lot of feminists and things like that, the Me Too movement, and they're saying, hey, no, we have value, we have you can't just treat us like property and things like that. And almost going back to what you mentioned earlier, where you have a lot of these radical feminists on the same side as conservative Christians. And again, there it's like what the Me Too movement gets right is kind of the message that a lot of the early church fathers were proclaiming, obviously to a degree, but.
Yeah, I have a whole chapter on the hookup culture, and there again I show that the hookup culture rests on a low view of the body. Mm-hmm. I have lots of quotes from college students that are very poignant, where especially the young women say, men are interested in me as a whole person. They're only interested in me as a body. Mm-hmm. And yet they treat the body as just recreation, not as having, you might say, oh, well, you sometimes see this in Christian literature. They'll say the hookup culture has too high a view of the body and of sex. No, it has too low a view of the body. And I have a quote, just yesterday, I was on campus at HBU, and in the restroom, a young woman started talking to me. And she said, so what do you think, when she heard that I taught apologetics, she said, well, first of all, she said, what's that? And I said, it's kind of showing people why Christianity is true and arguments for the existence of God and so on. And, we're equipping people to answer the objections that they hear from their secular friends. And she said, well, what do you think is the most common objection? I said, I think today it's sex.
Yeah.
That people are no longer asking, is Christianity true? They're asking, why are Christians such bigots?
Yeah.
And immediately she said, that's exactly it. I'm having this discussion with one of my friends. And I'm asking her, what is your objection to Christianity? She said, it's the real sex. And so I remembered this one quote from my book, Love Thy Body. It was a quote from a drummer, guy who plays in a band in Austin, Texas. And he was quoted in an article saying, sex is just a piece of body touching another piece of body. It is existentially meaningless. And that's what we have to help people to see. The hookup culture rests on the idea that sex is literally meaningless.
Right.
It has no higher meaning, that it's just a piece of body touching another piece of body. Mm-hmm. And so once again, the Christian ethic rests on a much higher value and dignity of the human body. And it says also that you can't separate the two. You can't separate the body from the mind. What you do with your body does have implications for the entire personality. And even science is showing us that,
Yes.
that sex involves certain hormones that are released, oxytocin and vasopressin, and that when you have sex, it's not just an emotional connection, it is actually a biochemical connection.
Right.
That you're making with this other person. One theologian put it this way: when Paul says, when you have sex with a prostitute, don't you realize you're becoming one body with her? And this, it's Lauren Winner, who's at Duke University, said, let's translate that into a modern idiom. Considering the biochemical aspect of sex, she said, don't you realize your body makes a promise even if you don't? Your body is making a biochemical connection. Even Glamour magazine, these days with the internet, you can find magazines and sources you would never read.
Right.
And Glamour magazine had an article warning young women casual sex may never be entirely casual. And the way the author put it was, you may be trying to have casual sex, that may be your intention. It said, but biology may trump your intentions. In other words, you are biologically forming.
Wow, and that was Glamour that said that.
Glamour magazine.
Wow. Yeah, that was honestly, I thought that whole chapter was heartbreaking to read. Just hearing those people's testimonies of just how just emotionally and spiritually destroyed these people are from the life that they're living in terms of just hooking up with whoever, and it was it's just devastating. And it's we've got science on our side in terms of the Christian response. It's not just trying to impose some puritanical don't do this, don't do that. It's no, it's like you were designed for this, and when you go against God's design, there's going to be consequences. Even just in the physical realm, it's not just something that's wholly spiritual; it's practical as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I was going to say, you mentioned there being the drummer that had the quote regarding it's just two bodies touching each other. And it seems like one of the biggest things that's affecting our culture today is pornography, because that's the biggest disconnect, where we're literally just objectifying to the maximum.
Yes, and again, it's the biochemical response. You can see it in the brain. If you do an MRI, you can see that when a person looks at pornography, the brain lights up and the oxytocin is flowing, and you literally are gaining a chemical addiction. People don't realize that, but you are getting a chemical addiction to pornography. That's one reason it's so difficult to stop. And you're right, in terms of finding the most extreme example of body-person split. In pornography, the viewer cares only about the body and cares nothing about the person. And after writing Love Thy Body, I actually read a book on pornography and on prostitution. This was fascinating. This was a woman who went out and interviewed prostitutes. And she found out that prostitutes themselves say the only way they can survive is by splitting off their body from their personhood, splitting off their body from their mind. She has lots and lots of quotes from prostitutes saying things like, I just shut down my body, I just numb my body and live in my head. That's the only way I can do this. Or I'm trying to think of some other quotes. One woman said something like, every time I do a trick, it's like, my soul is being worn away. So even on the level of, even when you pick up a book on prostitution, it turns out that mind-body split it explains the secular ethic again. That people who are agitating for the legalization of prostitution, they basically buy into it. They say, oh, she's not selling herself, she's just selling her body.
Right. As if you could disconnect the two. Yeah. So
it's everywhere. This mind-body dualism, the split, the dichotomy is everywhere. And it underlies the secular ethic in a whole host of areas. Anything basically that deals with the human person. And you guys should be very familiar with this because you do a lot of New Age and Eastern thought. It's really very similar, because it's just like in Hinduism, the body doesn't matter, the material world is bad, you want to escape the body. I think it's interesting that the Western thought is becoming more and more like Eastern thought.
Yes, it is.
And its denigration of the material world.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Well, shoot, I know we are getting short on time here, as much as we'd like to just carry on for many more hours. But So what encouragement do you have? I know you gave some earlier in terms of not being so rigid in things like gender roles and things like that for especially youths who are struggling. But what encouragement do you have for the church as we deal with this, as we are living in seemingly an ever more secular culture?
Well, I like the way you brought up science a minute ago, and I thought that might be worth following up on, because on every one of these issues, science is on our side.
Yes.
And this is something we really need to turn the tables on. Whether it's abortion, abortion, clearly science is on our side now. That the fetus is human from the beginning. And as I said, even secular bioethicists now say that. When it comes to transgenderism, clearly science is on the side of saying we are biological, our biological sex is central to who we are. Whether it's the pornography example that you raised, and all biologically, we are seeing the connection between the mind and the body. It's proving that you can't separate them.
Yes.
And same with the hookup culture. Science itself now is proving that you cannot separate body from person. You can't just engage in casual sex. That your whole self is inevitably involved. And so I don't think we've, as Christians, that we've quite taken advantage of this enough to say, look, we've been painted as anti-science for so long, right? And now the irony is that science is on our side on all of these issues. So I think that would be one area where Christians could up their game a bit.
Yes. And again, the irony of the people who are saying, don't push your religion on me, are now incorporating a worldview that says, well, your truth self isn't really identifiable. It's not objective. It's not based in any type of reality. It's just out here somewhere, some spiritual, metaphysical thing. It is somewhat ironic, but awesome. Well, Professor Pearcey, thank you so much. Real quick, where can our viewers go to check you out and get more information on you?
Well, I do have a website, nancypearcey.com, very straightforward. I'm fairly active on my Facebook page, so come and see me there. I'm fairly active on Twitter. You have to be these days.
Yes.
So I do interact with a lot of people on Facebook and Twitter as well. So, that's probably, in terms of accessibility online, those are good places to go. Okay.
Very good. Well, hey, thank you again so much. This has been a pleasure of ours. I know you are a hero of both of ours, and have very quickly become one of my favorite authors. So this has been a blessing. Thank you so much for doing what you do, and your work is a real gift to the church. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me. It's been great fun.
Okay, thank you. Have a nice night.
You too.
Okay, well, that was great. Guys, I want to encourage all of you to definitely check out her book. Love Thy Body is phenomenal. Really, all the books that she's written have been very good. This one, obviously, if you like the content that we were talking about today, she goes into much greater depth, and there was a whole host of issues that I would have liked to have gotten to discuss, but time just did not allow for that.
I think, also her book, Finding Truth, was like a catalyst for me to really understand this much more. So it was absolutely phenomenal. I definitely recommend checking that one out as well.
Yes, very much so. Cool. Well, that is gonna kind of do it for today. Next up for us, we're actually looking at doing a series of videos on Revelation and end times next. We have a couple guys that were in the works of bringing in people who have taught just the various positions out there. I know there's a lot of questions and and even fear and things like that from a lot of people, and there's really no need for that. But if we are in Christ, that is. So we're hoping to bring on some different people, do different episodes with different teachers from a different camp, and just kind of run the course around that a little bit. So definitely look that out. But we do want to encourage you guys, if you are not currently plugged into a local church, I really want to encourage you guys to do that. Whether your church is meeting, in person or not, depending on where you are, maybe not. But it's just so important for us, as believers to be part of a local faithful assembly. You need your church needs you.
And if you're having trouble finding one, reach out to us
hit
and
us
the
up.
group, and we will definitely search and find a solid church for you.
Hit us with your zip code. We'll send you back something to check out. But anyway, we love you guys so much. And we will, I guess, see you on the next one. Do we have anything scheduled yet for our next one? All right, well, hopefully a couple weeks we'll be back. It'll be good. It'll be good.
Bowed to his majesty, he paid sin salary, took up blame on Calvary. Those who love his name spread his fame is the policy. All eyes on the matchless price of his sacrifice.